Always trying not to build hot tea live. We are live. The NEA is interested in energy policy. The who? The NEA is here. Okay, we are back.
Want to listen?
We are live. This is Senate Finance, and we are going to get out of here before midnight. We have Tim Perrin, who's the Director of Energy, CPS, and Tim, the floor is yours. We will settle down and be quiet. And just tell us who you represent, and floor is yours.
Absolutely, will do. Good afternoon, Senators. For the record, my name is Tim Perrin, and I'm the Director of Energy Management at Vermont Gas Systems, also known as VGS. I have nearly 20 years of experience in energy efficiency and decarbonization program design and delivery, and in full disclosure, more than half of that was spent with VEIC, the parent company of Efficiency Vermont. I've also served as a member of the South Burlington Energy Committee, the Burlington Electric Commission, and Energy Codes Administration working groups, so I've really engaged with these concepts presented in S65 from a variety of perspectives. For background, Vermont Gas Systems is a natural gas distribution utility that serves 56,000 customers in Franklin, Chittenden, and Addison counties, providing around 25% of Vermont's thermal energy needs. We've also been delivering weatherization and energy efficiency programs for over 30 years, and were formally appointed as an energy efficiency utility in 2015. So we're very similar to Burlington Electric on the electric side, where they're a distribution utility as well as an EEU. As an energy service provider, we install many of the products and services that state climate policy is incentivizing, including weatherization and electric heat pumps. We've reviewed the testimony by key stakeholders, including the electric distribution utilities, the Public Utility Commission, and the Public Service Department, and share their concerns about this bill. While the EEUs and electric utility Tier 3 programs have historically been collaborative with complementary funding stacks, this bill as written introduces the potential for increased customer confusion at a minimum. Although the energy efficiency charge may be an attractive vehicle because it already exists in statute, this bill introduces a mismatch with the original intent of the EEUs to provide system-wide benefits to electric and natural gas ratepayers by reducing energy, transmission, and distribution costs. Testimony has indicated that S65 could put upward pressure on electric rates without some type of corresponding rate redesign, sending perverse price signals to households and businesses who have installed or are considering switching to heat pumps and electric vehicles. We note the Commission is beginning a study on these topics consistent with Act 142 of 2024.
Wow.
The underlying statute that created the EEUs over 25 years ago included broad language that enabled flexibility to adapt program designs to dynamic market conditions. And we are definitely in dynamic market conditions. As currently amended, S65 is incredibly prescriptive with language defining incentive levels and targeted customer classes, thereby limiting flexibility of how energy efficiency programs are delivered for maximum value in the future. And finally, defining EU budgets without the critical preliminary step of conducting a potential study, like the EUs do every 3 years, to determine the available energy efficiency potential does not align with the principles of least cost utility planning, which establishes the foundation of all of our regulated utility work, both EEUs and distribution utilities, to maintain rate affordability. We sense there's urgency to pass this legislation, but given the well-reasoned feedback presented by regulators and the distribution utilities today, we feel more due diligence is warranted. If the General Assembly wants to advance something, a study to comprehensively understand these policy issues would be more appropriate, and we'd be supportive of that approach. I thank you for your time and consideration and open to questions.
Okay, committee, do we have any questions? So
I do have questions because I don't think, Mr. Perrin, you testified in natural resources, or if you did, I don't remember. So I'm sorry.
I did not. Nice to
You did not,
meet you
okay.
too here. Yes.
Okay, so several of the witnesses have mentioned this report that's coming in December for Act 142-ish, I think.
Correct.
Also just got back an enormous report from the PUC on the clean heat standard, and that had some suggestions in it that have, hey, you don't think the clean heat standard is the best way to go, but there are other things you might consider. So I'm really reluctant to be like, okay, let's just do another report on kind of anything ever again. Of the reports that have come out, and are there things that you would recommend that from the report that just came out that would get to the goals of this? And or do you really think that the Act 142 report will actually get at any of this?
Well, we are effectively a thermal efficiency utility on behalf of our customers. And as Chair McNamara indicated earlier today, identifying where the surcharge is applied so that the benefits are delivered in alignment with the incentives is an important consideration associated with all this. I will point to Act 142 as being really important. I believe the title of it is the Energy Cost Stabilization Act. And in these times where affordability is paramount, really trying to understand what can be done with electric rate redesign, potentially heat pump specific rates, and figuring out a variety of different funding sources to advance some of our state policy goals is incredibly important.
What about natural gas rate redesign?
I think that is probably worth looking at as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Keep going. Matt Coda.
Matt Coda with Meadow Hill. I'll be incredibly brief. Just wanted to mention that I represent a number of different entities in this space. The Heating Cooling Contractors of Vermont, which is the Granite Groups, the FWS, the people that sell the heat pumps, and those that install it, like Sikio Heating and Chuck's Heating and Champlain Valley and all the rest. I also represent the Vermont Auto Dealers Association, which sell electric vehicles in this area, and I want to respect the committee's time and the chair's directive. The testimony that I've sent to Charlotte and sent to you effectively deals with the registration. And what I think is an important change that may come later in the year. Because it will establish actual registration and not one that I've spent the last 18 months dealing with lawyers trying to figure out how we can actually collect the data that's useful towards meeting our greenhouse gas emission goals. So I understand that you're not going to edit the bill as requested in my testimony, but I hope you'll at least consider it maybe at a later date.
Okay, and you will get another shot at this in the other body, but it isn't in our jurisdiction. And if I get out of our jurisdiction, I know some of you won't care if this bill dies, but some of you would. So I'm going to keep it moving.
Thank you.
Until I am told by the rest of this committee if it's going to live or die or in what form. Okay, Bill Driscoll. Is here.
Madam Chair, it's been a while. It's good to be back. I know. For record, William Driscoll with Associated Industries of Vermont, representing primarily the manufacturing sector in the state. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss in this bill. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to ask for time in the previous committee. I think our concerns mostly apply to the jurisdiction of this committee in any case. Going to be somewhat going over somewhat reiterating some points raised by earlier witnesses, but I want to kind of delve a little bit deeper into some of the concerns we have about costs and equity when it comes to this legislation. And to start off, with all due respect to my good and old friend Peter Walk, I have to categorically disagree with the assertion that this is a modest bill. This is a very extremely significant change, both in principle and practical effect, to how these various programs are designed and funded. You know, the there has been budget and mission creep for efficiency Vermont over the years, but to the extent that is delved into thermal fuels or fossil fuel conversion, it has been fairly limited both in time and scope. Basically, there would be, I see no limitations on how much of this budget could go to fossil fuel reduction, or any parameters around potential impacts, and an explicit prioritization of that direction, which would be the opposite of what used to be for electric efficiency. So it is a very significant proposal. Just to sort of set the stage of it for our concerns, particularly for manufacturers and other sort of high energy businesses, be it electric or fossil fuel based. But for Vermont, we've often talked about how Vermont has compared to the New England states in terms of our rates. In terms of commercial and industrial rates in particular, there's been fluctuation over time in terms of where we fall within New England in terms of the lower or higher rates, but fairly consistently nationally, which frankly, that's where manufacturers compete. We don't compete just in New England. We have to be aware of that.
If we know we are high nationally.
Yes, it's generally been about 30 to 40% in that range in terms of either commercial or industrial. Again, it fluctuates over time, but it's a big cost difference.
Wait till Canada shuts off the power.
But I think we have a friendlier province than our neighbors to the west. So it's a serious cost concern. And those concerns can be either aggravated or alleviated by efficiency Vermont and energy efficiency charge. That's been very contentious to me over the years, so where it exactly falls. But there always has been sort of a public trust and a logic to how the energy efficiency charge is determined and how it's applied. It does add a not insignificant amount to electric rates off the top. I think it's fluctuated at 5, 6, 7% around that range. That's not insignificant. But the promise, if you will, or the point, is that money is supposed to be going to electric efficiency projects, which is supposed to mitigate or reverse the impact of that charge two ways. One, efficiency projects in net can have systemic savings or societal savings, which can mitigate or counteract that rate impact. And then obviously for the companies or residents who actually do projects with Efficiency Vermont, that also has a reduction in the cost. So that the intent is supposed to be that those benefits offset the charge. Now, generally, we've been involved in those budget dockets off and on over the years. Generally, the societal savings have not been enough to offset the charge by themselves. So if you're a customer, you don't actually participate in programs, generally you end up paying more than that. But the savings from people who actually do projects, if you look at ratepayers as a whole, then the net is generally you get a positive rate of return, if you will. But this proposal would divert funding away from electric efficiency projects and toward greenhouse gas reduction projects. And there's no clarity as to how much would be diverted, but I think the way it sort of sets up the priorities and directions, it looks like, I think it could be significant. So what will that do? The less of the efficiency charge is used for electric efficiency charges projects, that you do not have those projects. So those societal savings are eroded. The opportunity for the individual customers to do projects themselves is undermined because there's less funding available for that. So it's not just how big is the efficiency charge itself, which is the cost impact, but if you are eroding and taking away the offsetting savings, then you're really running in a situation where you're paying more in the efficiency charge than you're getting back. And that is one of the key factors where this could be a net cost increase for ratepayers. And again, we can't quantify it because there's no clear guidelines in terms of how that spending is going to be distributed between electric efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions.
Okay, but we did the pilot project.
Mhm.
Because many, if not most of your manufacturers in this state use thermal energy.
Mhm.
And so if this additional money that's coming out of what they pay now can be used to reduce thermal costs
Mhm.
or help them be more efficient in their thermal energy, then you should have more people getting, being able to benefit from this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, like I said, there's been many kind of little ways in which the efficiency fund has been used for thermal purposes, and most of those we've opposed when it's been sort of it's been undermining the projects that kind of align with the public trust of what the efficiency charge is supposed to be. The example that you're talking about with the pilot project, first of all, that was extremely limited in terms of both the conditions
It has a lot of
and
conditions.
the customer base that it can be done for. It was very, very limited.
It was a
and-
hard fight to get it out of this committee.
And it was in the context of a pilot project where it was involving the companies using their own money.
Yes,
So to the extent that companies are using their own money, their own efficiency charge, to the extent that they want to use that for different purposes, that's really more up to them. It has less of a societal impact per se.
yes,
So I think there's a sharp distinction between that
yeah,
and sort of what we're talking about with consequences here.
But
But
it-
I'm glad you brought up because it's an important
Yeah.
distinction. And just frankly, apart from the fact that there is going to be a real cost impact if you're getting less for what you're paying in terms of an efficiency charge, whether there's an inflation adjuster or not, Matt Chair, I think you've alluded to the fact that trying in theory to cram so much into the same basket of funds, the idea that there's not going to be heavy pressure to increase that budget regardless. And then if you have the system in place, there's going to be that in terms as well, we've already committed, so we've got to, I'd be very concerned. Budget creep was a reality and a concern throughout the life of efficiency Vermont so far, just with electricity. I think there's been some discipline introduced in recent years, but that middle period, assurances that, it's only going to be this much, that never helped. So, those are some of the big cost concerns. Equity, I think that was also an issue. Again, you've heard, you're charging electric ratepayers for their electricity and using it for non-electric efficient. There's issues with that. That one of the underlying effects is basically the most electrified customers are going to be paying the most for services that are going to be provided to the least electrified customers who are paying the least. There's that overall issue. A particular concern to commercial and particularly industrial customers. This is somewhat related to our underlying concerns with the clean heat program. The potential, and I think you heard in reference to getting a potential studies of what are we even going to do and who's going to benefit. We have a generalized concern that there are fewer opportunities to electrify commercial, especially industrial uses that are not already so. It's one thing to increase the efficiency of a motor or increase the efficiency of some sort of machinery that's electric. Switching from non-electric to electric on industrial scales, it's not that you can't do it, but there's less opportunity. So for any given distribution of costs to commercial industrial customers, there's less opportunity that class is going to be able to benefit from it. So that's a concern. One potential uncertainty is right now, the efficiency charge is distributed between residential, commercial, and industrial customers, more or less, with at least some correlation to the benefit to those customer classes. That's founded on electric potential. This is going to disconnect the uses of these funds from that return formula. So we don't know how that may or may not be rectified in a redistribution of the energy efficiency charge between customer classes. And compounding that, carving out 25% of all spending for low income and moderate customers, and even 12.5% for small businesses, that's dramatically shrinking the pool that then industrial, other commercial, and other residential customers are going to be, in theory, competing on is what they get out of this program that they're paying into. So there's just all sorts of equity, either uncertainties or clear concerns and problems with what's being proposed. In many ways, it really begs the question. I think Andrea Cohen touched on this. If the supporters of this proposal really feel that they don't need to be spending this money on electric efficiency anymore, it begs the question why are we having the efficiency charge even to where it is? This proposal kind of so stretches and contorts this suite of programs between funding sources and uses of the funds and rationales behind all that. It makes it almost entirely unrecognizable. I think it makes the question that maybe we should just start from scratch and build a program and a funding source that actually makes sense, as opposed to kind of trying to push this into sort of that's what that it is. In terms of timing, I think a lot of these concerns and issues are squarely in the jurisdiction of this committee. Certainly, we think we should take more time on it. Concerns, or some of both the concerns and the reassurances from Peter. So I want to short comments on one. I think Senator Brock mentioned that in terms of syncing up with the 3-year budget cycle, that's something that can be adjusted to mitigate, maybe not entirely, but mitigate some of the complications of when this passes. But the idea that we can work on these problems after this, if this was passed, we could just work on these problems. That's not exactly true, because all the work that the PUC could do would be constrained and defined by the parameters of this bill. So you can't just fix the problems with this through a docket or a PUC process if you just pass this, because there'll be legislative constraints. To get that there are problems, it has to be fixed in the legislation in the first place. And kind of like what Ed McNamara said, don't pass a problem to have to come back and fix it. The whole shoot first, snap questions later is not as a legislative approach.
That's our specialty, sorry.
And the last thing I would say, just because it's part of the consideration, I think, of people voting on this bill. I know the repeal of the clean heat standard was kind of added at the end of along the way here, and I think for Frank, that's in part a way to try to increase support for the bill. We as an organization absolutely support the repeal of the clean heat standard. I think there's a lot of serious problems with it. Just repealing that doesn't necessarily address other more fundamental issues with the global warming solutions act in general. But I would have to say we just do not believe that this is the last chance to fix that issue. And we absolutely do not support this bill. Even with the repeal of the clean heat standard, it's not a price worth paying for that other goal, which I think we can address elsewhere.
Yeah, so if we did what you wanted, and we did away with the efficiency charge,
Mhm.
and we put a tax on fossil fuels,
Mhm.
would you guys guarantee us in writing we wouldn't start screaming we're using a carbon tax?
No. Because we would first have to know what is the program that's being designed and how is it going to be funded. If we have a cost-effective, incredible program, then how do we fairly pay for that, and how much that can absolutely positive conversation would love to be involved in. We certainly would seek to be involved in it. But I don't think you're going to come with that in that 12 hours.
No.
So.
I don't think we are. And in part, you were reaping what you sowed, because some of you in this room have done such a good job fighting the clean heat standard
Mhm.
that doing anything in the fossil fuel tax is in the fossil fuel world to reduce and finding any funding. We are extremely restricted.
Yes, but still, it's,
And yet we keep hearing about these major floods that are coming through here. I haven't seen the river today, but I know they closed 2 schools here for flooding last week. We're trying to find a way through without increasing cost.
Yep.
And
the devil's always in the
if
details.
it always is, and if we could find some way to work cooperatively,
Mhm.
that would make all of our lives a lot easier.
Yes, and I'm sure there's any number of ways where stakeholders, I think, could come together and agree. This is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions committee. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, TJ.
I think Alec and I are gonna tag team if that's all
Okay,
right.
I was just gonna say, if you've got
Trying to speed this up.
you got a dog and pony show, you're gonna have to grab a chair somewhere, maybe
Steal this
over
one
there.
from Dylan. Yeah.
Dog and pony show. I don't know where that.
Are you the pony?
It's one of those old sayings, and I don't think it's been banned yet. But I may find out.
Live on YouTube.
Okay, well, thank you for having us here today. I'm TJ Poor, I'm the Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. For those of you who don't know me, I started my career at the department for the first 10 years in the Energy Efficiency Division, overseeing and regulating efficiency Vermont. I left for a while to manage municipal power supply. And it came back first as the director of the efficiency division, and then now in my current role as the director of planning. So I have a long history on both sides, the utility side and the efficiency utility side of energy efficiency. I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I'm gonna open up.
Yeah, Alec Yansak, I'm director of the Energy and Efficiency Division, PSD. I'm relatively new to the role, been about 6 months. But previous to that, I spent 16 years in private consulting, working with electric and gas utilities, designing, evaluating, implementing demand management programs, efficiency, demand response, electrification, storage, solar, all that kind of stuff.
So, yeah, I'm gonna open up here and talk about a few things, and then Alec is gonna get into the details with some presentation. But as you know, the Public Service Department is charged with representing the public interest in regulated utility matters. We cannot support this bill for 3 real fundamental reasons. One, it undermines the foundation of efficiency work. You've heard that today, and I'll go into a little more detail. It absolutely raises electricity cost pressures. You've heard opposite of that, and we'll talk about why that is. And third, it would lead to reduced prioritization for weatherization, which we believe is a top priority for the state. It comes from our energy plan, it comes from the climate action plan, and it really helps the most protected Vermonters. So on the first point, really, this bill really upends the last couple of decades of really incrementally established policy founded on the premise that modest upfront investments in electric efficiency is ultimately cheaper for Vermonters in the long run than alternative electric supply options. That really holds true. And I've heard you talk about that a lot today. In our efficiency utility structure, be better. Can it become even more efficient and be improved? Yes, absolutely. That is the case. This bill isn't the way to do that. Even some reprioritization could be considered, but As currently constructed, our electric efficiency work really lowers customers' electric bills and ultimately reduces the amount of energy needed on the grid. So just going back to that fundamental purpose. Regionally, it took years of advocacy, about a decade, to get ISO New England to actually recognize energy efficiency as a resource like any other power supply option. They would procure power in their capacity markets, ensuring we have enough generation to serve our load. And they weren't accounting for efficiency because they did not trust that state programs, state policy would continue to support it. If we completely shift the priority away from electric efficiency, that risks undermining that foundation of trust that's been built regionally. ISO New England may need to procure more capacity because they will not believe that what we've said, what we've budgeted over the long term is going to happen. Vermont and Efficiency Vermont was really critical in that conversation for the region and showing that we had these investments over the decades and the long-term plans for funding efficiency in order to get that support. And it would be a risk to change
So
that.
we've lost those payments. Those are payments that are now going to thermal energy, right?
Well, so the
They
So
can be used.
there's two things that happen. So one, ISO New England says we're going to need 36 gigawatts, 36,000 megawatts to serve the regional demand at the. And what previously happened and said, well, we need 36,000 megawatts of supply resources. And after a decade, we said, hey, you don't need that much supply. We only need 35,000 or 34,000 megawatts of supply because we have this supply embodied in energy efficiency. And so that's the one side of it that saves money.
And
That efficiency gets payments from the marketplace, which is what you're talking about, which the legislature directed to thermal programs.
Yes.
Correct.
this committee asked, I'm not sure if it was you or PUC to request those payments or suggest them. And we were pretty much told we were crazy. They would laugh Vermont out of the room. We got them. But that was a major change. It had never happened, and if we hadn't asked for it, it probably wouldn't have happened. And that was, before we'd done a whole lot of the changing to renewables, and I think there were still the 3 coal plants in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that, I actually wasn't even going to touch on that today, but that's another area of revenue that would be lost if we diverted
If we
electric.
stop, okay, so if we significantly stop reducing our demand for electricity, that's gonna be really interesting to see how that plays out. Because no matter what we do here, and I think probably most of New England is interested in moving off of fossil fuel. All right, so we're in another time of change.
Absolutely. And so that's one cost pressure. And that's not even to electric rates, really. That is just if we divert, less revenues come in from that marketplace. And those revenues right now go to weatherization and thermal programs, and that would be reduced. What the cost pressures that I wanted to start to raise, and Alec will go into much more detail on, is that the way the S65.
Interrupt for a second, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I'm really tired, so I just missed that part of the conversation. Why would that be reduced? Can you just give me a 2-sentence answer?
Right, so the electric efficiency programs that we have now are bid into a regional marketplace or a capacity market.
Yep.
and that generates revenue. They get paid by the market in order to, and by the rest of the region in order to.
So you're saying
supply
that
that
would go
capacity.
down because there would be fewer electricity efficiency projects and it would be more toward thermal projects?
The first part, there would be less efficiency projects, correct? Less electric efficiency projects. So
Right,
the
because-
revenue would go down.
Because more of the funds would be diverted in your,
It would be diverted to something,
to
yes.
thermal.
Yeah, or to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, not necessarily thermal.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure I was
Right.
following.
Yes, it is.
I'm tired and I have a headache, but I'm still trying to keep
Sorry.
going.
Appreciate your all's endurance for the last presentation of the day.
Next time we'll put you on first.
Thank you.
Make it look.
Uh,
Serious.
So, the way S65 is structured, electric customers keep paying the current efficiency charge, but it eliminates or significantly reduces the electric efficiency service in favor of greenhouse gas emissions, right? I'll agree to that. That's what leads to upward rate pressure, though, and associated increases in electric bills. Mr. Walk said that this bill is driving additional greenhouse gas work without additional costs, and I completely disagree with him. Currently, Efficiency Vermont receives the efficiency charge, right, which ratepayers pay. That charge, let's say it's $50 million. It's roughly $50 million per year that they get used to procure efficiency resources. For every dollar that in efficiency charge, there's $1.40 in benefit to the electric grid. So ratepayers as a whole, electric grid that's returned to ratepayers in the form of lower electricity costs. That is power that our distribution utilities do not have to go out and purchase. And those benefits accrue to all ratepayers. So for every dollar collected, $1.40 is returned to ratepayers. So if we divert that to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, then electric demand increases, more power needs to be added to the grid. Particularly when those demands come with the necessary infrastructure investments. If there's electrification that's supported, we need infrastructure investments, that's even more cost. Costs continue to go up. So the $50 million in efficiency work saves Vermonters $70 million in energy costs through the reduced power supply and infrastructure needs. So we have $50 million of efficiency charge. And that 50 million gives us 70 million in benefits, right? It's been a good deal for Vermonters. It is a good deal. It has been a good deal and it continues to be. So under this bill, though, Efficiency Vermont would have to then would be collecting the same $50 million. And if they put it all, let's say they put it all towards greenhouse gas projects that don't save electricity. That's the extreme scenario, right? Every dollar goes to
But we've
greenhouse
already
gases.
got 37%, I think, dedicated to low. But we are weatherizing houses that don't have electric heat presently.
That's a really tiny, with the electric efficiency charge, that's a really tiny part of
It
their
is,
budget.
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
fraction of
efficiency,
a percent.
there's money coming in.
Right, some of that thermal money goes to, from the Ford capacity market. And,
Okay.
Red
So-
Greenhouse Gas
so-
Initiative goes to weatherization, but not the electric efficiency.
And the two.
Not, yeah, okay.
The heating.
It's the forward capacity,
That goes to.
but if we up our electric usage and we don't up our efficiency, then we're at risk of losing or not gaining forward capacity money.
That's on top of what I'm talking about
Yeah,
here.
okay.
Yes, yep.
But yes, if you're not putting the money we have now into electric efficiency projects, you're gonna lose that you're gonna gain something else. I guess who does that balancing? And on what basis?
Well, right now, we would gain greenhouse gas emissions reductions presumably, in the way this bill was prioritizing. That would be the priority that the Public Utilities Commission would have to follow when approving, plan to use it.
That doesn't sound like me.
So just again, the current state is $50 million are collected from electric ratepayers. If that is diverted, we're still collecting $50 million from electric ratepayers, and utilities then have to replace that power to the tune of $70 million. So that power, right? So we've gotten $50 million worth of efficiency, electric supply. Staging that is now diverted to greenhouse gas emissions benefits. Utilities have to replace that power. So the total investment is actually now $120 million. So Alec will go into a little more detail on that. I'm gonna pause there so we can, I know it's late in the day, or stop on that point and continue. Stand corrected.
We didn't choose this setup. Yeah, I'm looking at this. I like pictures.
Okay, good. We'll get into the pictures. I just want to talk about weatherization real quick, and then I'll stop
These are
talking.
pictures, they're words.
So,
Just stop talking, show the picture.
the last thing is just this reduces the priority for weatherization, right? The electric efficiency and the thermal budgets are now both kind of combined in S65 with a priority on greenhouse gas reductions. Weatherization is great. It reduces, especially for low income, reduces energy costs for the most vulnerable, health and safety improvements. But it does, and it has greenhouse gas reduction benefits, but it is not the best bang for the buck in terms of greenhouse gases. So really, S65 prioritized greenhouse gas work at any cost over keeping Vermont rates low and helping customers to reduce their electric bills. If we have rate pressures, we forecast an 18% increase in rates under business as usual by 2030 relative to 2023. And that's without any tariffs or other added above expectation inflationary pressures. In this kind of context, we don't want to put additional pressure on electric rates where we're trying to get people to electrify.
TJ, can I ask you, your point about the weatherization. So Efficiency Vermont, that's not their primary thing they do right now. It's not. So how would this reduce the weatherization? Because they're not doing a lot of that right now anyway.
Well, they
So how would
do
it
1,000 homes a year with the thermal money.
But you don't get the 2%, the 2 cents on the heating fuel, doesn't that go to DCF?
Well, that's where the forward capacity market and revenues from the regional greenhouse gas.
Oh, so you're just
That-
talking about
that's-
those two funding
those
sources,
two
not
funding
the money that goes to the low income
Correct.
weatherization program at DCF.
Here,
Correct.
Okay.
okay.
Okay, I'm gonna stop talking and turn it over to Alec now, and he has pictures.
It's 5 o'clock in the
Sure.
afternoon.
Sure.
You should stay to share your screen.
Get my second win. Let's keep going. Yeah, I need to.
I just want to read my organic service and I'll be good with it.
My kid goes to bed in 2 hours.
Oh, come on, guys, you gotta top it up. Wait till the end of the session. We'll be at midnight.
Chair love this.
Oh, yeah, chair's a night person. I was not happy at 8 o'clock this morning, but I was here in a meeting at 8 o'clock.
Okay, so promise I'll get to the pictures really quick, but before,
birds.
yeah, sorry, this is bait and switch. So I just, before I start to talk about the impacts to rates and why the diversion of the efficiency charge would create upper grade pressure, I just want to relay some of the information that the department already kind of developed over the summer through the clean heat standard process. And it's just really to give a sense of context around, like, you've heard that this is not that big a deal. Some people have said this is a huge deal. I think that the part of the language in S65 that says the department and the commission are supposed to complete a potential study eventually, and that will determine appropriate level of funding, what the right targets are. We've already done that study through the clean heat standard process.
That's what I thought, that's what I was saying in the last.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the clean heat standard and this policy are very similar. I think the key difference is that clean heat relied on a market mechanism to direct investment. This relies on the cost effectiveness algorithm. Otherwise, fairly similar. And certainly in terms of the size of the target. And that's what I really want to illustrate here is that potential study identified $1 billion that could be spent cost effectively in any given year on GHG reduction stuff. And that was in the context of GWSA, which is a limited target, all reasonably cost effective, could be more than $1 billion. And that's just the thermal sector. This bill also seems like it maybe targets transportation. It's not actually that clear to me, but it seems like it's in there. And so, you know, the thermal sector is 31% of our emissions, transportation is like 40.
Yeah.
So, you know, we haven't done that study, but it's a huge undertaking that this is proposing redirecting the efficiency utility at. So I just want to make sure that's clear. I'm not suggesting the PUCs with $5 billion program or something, but context is important. It's, you know, it's more than the total all-in cost annually for the electric grid in the state. So significant. The other piece is that there, you know, there's no language about affordability in here. I know it mentions a low income spend, but it doesn't specify explicitly what that's meant to be spent on. Prioritizes weatherization, but not entirely clear. And as many have said, you know, electrifying the thermal sector, a noble goal perhaps, but the increase in cost that will bring about without weatherization or efficiency in general, there is no way to mitigate that for anyone, and particularly that burden would be felt by the most vulnerable Vermonters most acutely. And I think the reason that it deprioritizes weatherization, I think there's been some question around this too. So I don't have to rehash the benefits of weatherization. We all understand what it can do. But I think this table that EDT provided actually as part of their testimony in the Senate Natural Resources illustrates this point very clearly. They've got the relative amount of CO2 emissions that are reduced per dollar incentive spent. And you see these several measures at the top are like very niche commercial and industrial measures. Tremendous bang for your buck. Some of them even save electricity, but they have a very limited scope of application. You're talking about, you know, tanks of refrigerant at global foundries and those kinds of things. It's, you know, you get a ton of GHG savings. Refrigerants are horrible greenhouse gases, but there's not a ton of opportunity in the state for that. And so when you get down to the more ubiquitous measures, you see that air source heat pumps and ductless heat pumps are in the mix there. And that's really where fuel switching lives. And then below that, you have insulation, the Home Performance with Energy Star program, which is sort of a market rate approach to weatherization. And then you don't even have low income weatherization on there, but if it were, that decimal point would probably be a whole place over to the left in terms of what the cost effectiveness would be. And so you can see that you're talking several decimal places less of benefits for weatherization than you would get for fuel switching if greenhouse gases are your key driver. And so that's, I think, what we mean when we say that weatherization and, you know, the ability to mitigate the effects of rate increases from electrifying space heating becomes the lowest priority. It does not that they can't do it. It's just that there is no real incentive to do it because they get so much more bang for their buck in other places. So I think, beyond that, the bigger point I want to make, and I promise I'll get to the pictures here in a second, is that prioritizing GHG, as many have said before me, will divert the efficiency charge to non-electric efficiency purposes, which will put upward pressure on rates. But the second piece of that is that if you're diverting it to weatherization, this has also been said before, you are necessarily away from to greenhouse gases, excuse me. You are necessarily targeting fuel switching, and there's like liquid fuel blends and things like that I'm not sure really are probably outside purview this. But the next best thing is fuel switching. As you can imagine, you remove the heating equipment rather than just making it more efficient. You get more GHG savings. And even though heat pumps are probably more expensive on a per project basis, the amount of greenhouse gas reduction you get is just it dwarfs the comparable amount in weatherization, so it's just much more cost effective. And so when you do that, you're adding additional load to the grid, and that will further put upward pressure on rates, which all serves to send, I would argue, probably the opposite market signal that we want if you want everyone to electrify their spaces.
Okay, so you save greenhouse gas, you put in a heat pump. But the heat pump requires a lot of electricity.
Correct.
Without efficiency measures, then the cost of that heat pump on my monthly bill is going to be more significant than it would be if we would be more efficient in our use. Okay, this is starting to feel a little bit like the chicken and the egg. Because we want to increase electric use, but that's going to require we put out poles and wires and solar fields and a lot of other things. And if we do that and we increase use more, then we either make it more efficient use or we create more in-state power, which is, there's a cost. So that cost has to be shown in the rates. So, yeah. Does anyone know where the break even is in this? I mean,
I'm sure I understand.
I mean,
Break even. Well, I mean,
where do we find the equilibrium between efficiency and trying to remove and trying to balance fossil fuel emissions? But the whole problem with the Clean Heat Act was, how do you help people make the transition? Because the transition is expensive. And if the promise is, other than the fact that you are a wonderfully ethical world citizen and you want to move off of fossil fuels, but if you can't feed your family for the cost of being ethical, you won't do it. And that's been the issue. How do we find the money, short of printing it, which they won't let this committee do?
Why don't you change it? Revisit that.
Why not changing?
Yeah,
I mean, we can declare ourselves an independent nation and start putting our own.
We've done it before.
They've already got loonies. What would?
readings.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is getting late. Okay. So it's a quandary. I mean, There's
is.
just no cheap way out of this.
I think that that's true at the end of the day, but I think that the point I'm trying to articulate is that if you remove electric efficiency from the equation, it just exacerbates the problem.
Okay, but is there a balance here on this teeter-totter? Could we put some money into carbon emissions, fossil fuel, whatever you want to
You mean from the electric efficiency?
from the electric efficiency? Because we've done a couple of pilots lately.
Mhm.
Could we divert some? Not all, not the
Yeah.
majority, but could, and what is the sum we could do, or who decides the sum?
I mean, I think maybe as 289 takes a stab at that.
H-
Or H 289, I'm sorry. But I think generally to your point, yes, probably. I think that there are places where efficiency mod could be more focused. But I think that it's again, there's another question of balance within the scope of what Efficiency Vermont delivers. And a lot of the money that they spend, the majority of the money that they spend doesn't go one-to-one for like rebates that buy equipment and stuff. Most of the money they spend is on technical advisory services and education campaigns and that kind of thing. And so, you know, some of that stuff maybe is a little bit squishier, and it's hard to say if you pull back, does it have measurable effect or not? Less so on the direct
Okay.
throughput rebate side. But yes, I think in a word, yes, I think there is room that they could probably divert some of their revenues to this and still remain intact.
If I could just add to that, Alec mentioned H 289, which you all probably heard about, or it's in the House side, but it's the governor's affordability initiative. And there are pieces of that that are related to exactly what we're talking about. And it does say you have the opportunity to capture efficiencies. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but I will. Efficiencies in the electric efficiency budget. Use some of that money as a bridge while we figure out the long-term solution. And so there is, the answer to your question is yes, there is a balance of what the right amount
Is
is.
it out,
and it's
is it gonna
temporarily.
make it over here?
That's
It
a
has to
very
be
good-
voted out by Friday.
They have not taken a lot of specific testimony.
Then
on
it's
it.
not
So,
gonna make it here this year.
So,
All right.
but there is a proposal out that,
Okay.
and so the answer I think is yes.
Did that proposal get presented to our Natural Resources Committee?
This H 289 includes a bunch of different things.
Okay.
So one of the things it does include, I think, I'm just scrolling through it now, is the repeal of clean heat standard, which we did
This one.
talk about. It's in S65. There are other things. It changes the renewable energy standard. It, I think, repeals the Global Warming Solutions Act. It does a whole bunch of things. So maybe there are pieces that are relevant, but it's a much bigger
Okay,
thing.
but you didn't,
It's an H bill, so. we
Yeah,
didn't do
but
it.
that's,
S 110 is the companion. It's sitting on the wall over in.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a companion, right?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
continue.
picture.
Picture.
Yeah, that's the one, that's what I was thinking. Picture.
Well, so yeah, back to the initial point. So you energy efficiency is a resource that, you know, either you could think of it multiple ways, or either it reduces the total demand you need. Or another way to think of it is it's a resource like any other that just gets inserted in the stack of resources. And so what this picture shows is it's called a supply curve. And so this is one of the key tools that grid operators use to provide some transparency in cost of power. And so basically what you do is, you know, if you have a power need, you create one of these things, and what it does is it stacks up all the resources you have in an ascending order of cost per unit. So that's the height of the bar. And then the width of the bar is the total amount of resource that a particular asset can contribute. And, it's obviously more complicated than that, but basically the principle is you slide across the x-axis until you hit the total amount of demand you need, and that sets your price. And so what efficiency does is, like I said, it either moves that demand bar to the left or it stretches out your resource stack. So either way, you come in at a lower price. And that puts downward pressure on rates. And as long as that little orange stripy bar is low, the size of that bar represents sort of your total savings. That's your return, basically. But as long as it's lower than what you would have paid in supply, then we consider that to be a cost-effective investment. And so that's, I think, when you hear the term cost effectiveness, that's really what we're talking about. And so what happens if you divert the EPC? Well, first of all, you snap back to where you were because the grid's got to be made wholly.
You don't lose what you've done.
You don't lose what you've done, but remember, efficiency, you do it once and then it lasts for a long time.
Right.
And so you have that cumulative stack effect, and as things start to die off, you will start to lose it.
Right, because as you increase demand, then you're pushing that bar over that way.
Right. And
Okay.
and if you were to just stop doing efficiency, that demand would slowly start to creep further and further, right? It doesn't happen like immediately, but it starts the process. And the thing about that is because it's that cumulative effect, once you stop to get back, you have to invest in multiple years worth of that efficiency all at once again. And so it becomes extremely expensive just to get back to where you were. So that's the first thing that will happen. But then, as I said, if you start to electrify space heating, then you're adding further demand to the grid. And so not only have you snapped back to where you would have been, but you've also moved into a higher price.
Higher cost.
And this looks linear. I mean, this is just an illustrative example. We obviously don't have most of these resources in our stack.
Cold.
You're right. Yeah. So,
I thought we
thanks
closed
Google
the Three
Image Search,
Sisters.
but yeah. But the point here is that the curve rises in cost sort of exponentially.
And so we're gonna hit natural gas, because I don't,
whatever it
Which
is,
is up
it
there,
gets,
yeah.
gets
You're
more
going
expensive,
up.
it gets dirtier typically.
Yeah.
It's just all the bad things happen the further to the right you go. And so, electrifying without efficiency, you're going to get that compounding effect, and it's
Right.
going to exponentially increase the price. And so you have that sort of 1 + 1 = 3 effect
And
on
the-
upward pressure on rates.
so we give you $200 incentive to buy, $2,000 or an $8,000 heat pump. But if it's going to cost me 3 times as much to heat my house with the heat pump, then
Why would you do it?
I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
I just can't, most of us can't afford to do it.
Right.
In the state, most of us are not going to live long enough, given our demographics, to realize any savings from that investment. So if you're doing it with a common good for many people.
I have a fully electrified house. I get it, but your point is well taken. And that is well, I guess I'll just go to my next slide. Like that is the key unintended consequence, I think, of this bill is that, if you're going to drive up costs, I think that makes electrification more expensive and less attractive, which I think contributes to the bill. Which is unfortunate because we're not here to dispute the need for urgency of action, climate, or it's not about that. It's just the use of the EEC to do this is the wrong financing mechanism.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee. We have to make some decisions. We're either gonna do it today, maybe tomorrow will be easier. I think it might be. But I think tomorrow's floor time probably will go longer and we have. Are we still getting, our witness on Fridays, taking? All right, we're trying to get her 2.5 months. So I don't know what we're gonna do.
Madam Chair, does this
Yeah.
need sort of appropriations due, or is it just in our committee, and if it needs to move, it needs to get up by Friday?
It needs to get out by Friday. No, this one is going to.
Some of it.
So we need to get it out, or we need to decide it's not coming out. Really today. So it sounds like we've done some experiments, which has allowed some part of the efficiency charge to be used to do thermal. There's a discomfort on almost everybody's part that's been in here about how much this will expand it, what will be the impact of putting in more demand for electric and not doing enough efficiency work. I think we know, and I hope Ellen is still listening. It might be able to come down. We've got some discomfort over clarity as to what I think they've told us we can freeze the budget. And since there is a new 3-year contract going to be set in January, I think we could freeze the budget and get rid of all the inflation stuff for the duration of that contract. We could clarify, so that does away with all the inflation and the nervousness there. We might need to be clearer on, because there seemed to be concern that Efficiency Vermont would be doing tier 3 programs in competition with the utilities 3-tier programs. Efficiency said, no, they won't. They do that together. I trust, since we're told we have really smart people doing things, that they would do things together. You'll get more electric cars bought if you do a $5,000 rebate rather than $1,000 from here and $1,000. It just is more efficient. I don't know. We have done programs. And I guess the question is there a way? There's also the concern that if we stop doing efficiency, and when, not if, we up our demand for electricity, we will stop getting the forward capacity payments because we're getting paid not to put demand on having to build new generation and transmission lines, is my understanding, and somebody can, okay, Greg's nodding and he didn't know. So if we start using more electricity, we run the risk of losing or reducing those lines, which is the money we are now using to do thermal. So I'm wondering if we can find a way, and I'm getting set, I think, because I'm getting tired, to see if the PUC and efficiency can, I don't know. I'm going to do a poll of the committee at this point. Who thinks we might be able to put something together that we could get out of this committee? Okay. One. I think we can. I'm not sure about,
So that's my question. Today's Wednesday. Do we have to move it out tonight, or if we got it out tomorrow and folks had it for Friday, would that be crossing?
if this is a priority bill and the pro tem wants it to move forward and the House wants it to move forward, then the Rules Committee can move it forward. Very much like we're doing with education. Okay? It is it is another one of the balloons. When you push it here, something pops out there. And you get into, if you put the wrong amount of pressure and something pops out where you don't want it, you could do more harm than good. So Randy, I'm looking for feedback.
A bill like this deserves deliberation and consideration and study. And putting it out, whether it be today, tomorrow, or Friday, is too fast for us to be able to effectively do that. It's got to go not just to us, it's got to go to the Committee of Jurisdiction, as they've got to have time to look at what we've done to their creation. And that's just not fair. When we do this, we keep the moose in the middle of it. And that's what we're liable to do here.
I think that's always the concern when we're dealing.
The bill as it is right now, I'm concerned about the unintended consequences that it has about things that we haven't thought through. There are pieces of it that are almost unreadable, such as that 151 word sentence.
Where is that?
I think we just like to be said about every bill.
Well, no, every bill doesn't have stuff that we have bills that actually come through that we understand
They're really short.
occasionally.
Yeah.
No, in this area, this is highly complex.
And the fact that we have this uniformity of reaction, even from our regulator that we charge with overseeing this stuff, that to me is a clue.
Okay. In principle, would we like to get a bill out that would allow more flexibility with the efficiency charge, to allow it to be used to do something in thermal?
Well, one of the questions is, have we got and have we had time to effectively analyze the results of the studies that we've done, the work that we've done? In other words, what's happened with West Rock and so on and so forth, and the thermal efficiency exception that we made, which was the pilot project for this.
Yeah, we did that last,
I know, but have we evaluated the results? I'm not sure.
I think we did last year. We looked
Did
at the,
Good.
at West Rock and I
I mean,
forget
it
their
would be
name,
useful,
they're
you know, looking at this
Brattleboro
to
and they
refresh our
do the
memories of that.
filters.
Yeah, I do think, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we got testimony in our morning committee about those pilot programs being successful.
We
I don't
must
know if
have
that's a reason to move forward, but just to
Yeah,
say, we
I
did get.
don't remember seeing it myself, but again, maybe where it came back to, I wasn't on that committee at that time because I only saw those in finance and I didn't see it on one of the morning committees.
Yeah, we did that a couple of years ago when I was here before, but they're
We did the
finished
same,
now,
but
yeah, but
we
they're.
were told we
started.
did it last year and made it permanent, so I'm assuming we did. Senator Gould.
Thank you. I'll start by saying I want to stave off the coming climate apocalypse just as much as anyone does, for sure, maybe even more. I don't know. But in terms of this process, I'm feeling extremely frustrated. This is a highly charged session. We are trying to save our healthcare system. We have a plan on the table for a completely new education system. And some of us have been working on that. And then to get this bill that, yes, has a uniformity of testimony and categorically opposing views from some really important people. I find it really frustrating and difficult to make an intelligent decision today. And so, that's how I'm feeling right now at almost 6:00 PM. I wish I could be more optimistic and sunny about it, but it's really quite frustrating, actually.
Senator Matos.
Yeah, I'll just, kind of piggyback on what Senator Gulick said. When I sit in this chair and hear from the individual who's at the head of one of the organizations that has 23 years experience and they can barely get their head around it. And, I sit here and my experience is pretty much just paying that efficiency charge on my bill. And being able to turn around a decision in 4 hours and grasp this whole bill is difficult for me. And I don't think I'm in a place to be able to, lean one way or the other on it. But from what I've heard today, I'm not in a position to work.
Okay. Many members that are on natural resources. What? I'm looking for a way
Yeah.
to salvage this.
So, where I was at on this bill was, I voted for the bill. The bill was divided in committee. I was a no on the efficiency charge, there was a yes on the repeal and the registry. And I really have a lot of discomfort when, like PUC and the PSD, which is looking out for the public in the electric market. And I just have a lot of discomfort when those people are saying they don't understand it, or they think that we need to go slower, or we need to, and then on top of that, the regulated utilities are saying no. So that's why I was a no on the efficiency charge. I'm still not comfortable with the efficiency charge. I was a yes on the bill, but the bill's bigger than the efficiency charge.
Want to hear from me?
Yeah.
So I was a yes on the bill and the entire bill in my morning committee. If I were, and I worked really hard with the chair and Efficiency Vermont to try to clarify the language. It is a really complicated part of the statutes. And even our drafting attorney was like, oh my gosh, this is so.
She's a veteran of the housing
Yes,
board.
yeah, and so you can see some of the things in the bill, just for example, there's a part where on page 9, where we laid everything out as a list, because it was one big long sentence, to your point, Senator Brock. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is a huge sentence with just a list of things. Can we make it an actual enumerated list? And we did that. So I worked really hard to try to get it to be more clear and, make it so it was a little more palatable. I will admit, based on the testimony that we heard today, if I were you hearing this testimony for the first time, I would vote no. It was overwhelmingly against the bill. And I would feel really concerned about hearing from the regulator. And I just think about in healthcare, you hear from the regulator and the regulated and all the people in between and are against something, and you think maybe we need to stop. So I think if, like I said, if I were all of you hearing this for the first time, I would be a no on the bill. I voted yes on it. I think there's a lot of merit to what Efficiency Vermont is trying to do. I'm not sure this is the right mechanism, but I did support the bill and worked hard to try to make it more clear. But again, it still is missing the mark.
Complicated. Perhaps because I think we need to vote out the second half of this bill that isn't in our jurisdiction, I think. I think there are people who don't care if we do that.
Can we?
Mr. Conan cares if we do that. But then we can hold things hostage. Having heard what we heard, because I think everyone in this room wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But I think we don't want to endanger the progress we've made on efficiency, the money we're getting because we're efficient. I've always said, the reason I couldn't sell an electric house, the reason every condo that was built in the 80s in Montpelier had electric storage heat and they have all gone to propane is cost. And if we can't keep that cost down, then people are not going to be able to make the switch. And so, and we can't say at this point, we could get hit with a 25% tariff. But I think if we could salvage part of this bill, and I'm looking at the people involved who aren't all here, but to see if we couldn't get something smaller and tighter that might move us 1 foot ahead rather than 3 feet ahead. That would be progress. I guess we can let the whole bill die here. So some people might have a motivation to develop stuff, but I'm not hearing I've got the votes. I'm hearing that we've got some of us that want to find a way through this. But it's 6 o'clock at night and I think everyone's brain is at this point pretty fried. Some of us were in public hearing until 8 o'clock last night. So I'm going to leave it. I know the chair is there. See if we can put something together. I'm pretty sure this is a priority bill, and I gather the House owes us one. So I think we could get this through rules if we could find something tighter. 10-word sentences. Because I want Senator Brock doing something other than categories.
The word counter is still up.
Okay, I think that's as much as we're going to do constructively. Thank you, committee. I'm hoping tomorrow will be a little shorter and we might be able to get this back. Anything the PUC could help us with that would help you with what kind of criteria would you need to know how?
Have dinner.
Yeah.
Just,
To fix it.
yeah.
I need a button line.
Consult.
Go
Fix it.
go phone a friend.
Most of them.
Well, fix it in a very narrow sense.
Oh, well.
You can take it